think it's actually more successful because Myanmar is not currently doing that well, Burma, as I would have hoped. It made great progress for 3 years or so, but now with the elections coming, things are now regressing.
If you look at, I guess the two biggest and most consequential sort of pieces of global real estate, Russia and besides the United States, Russia and China are probably preeminent. And I wonder, you've had a substantial effort in each. You were really not involved within either country as much now, or really to any great effect as before. And I wonder how you look back on those involvements and what you think these two countries, what angle of repose are they going to find towards each other? Are we heading for a new alliance of the sort of former empires who feel beset upon by the West, victimized by the West, or is this just a temporary marriage of convenience?
You mean
Russia and China? Yeah. There's a lot in that question, but how you view your own involvement in each and where you think they're headed?
Well, I set up a foundation in China in 1985, actually, 84, 85.
Which were the most open years, really, of the whole 20th century.
And I closed the foundation in 89. At one time we had some reconciliation, but basically the foundation has never been welcome again. So it was 84 to 89 that I was deeply involved there. Now you have got a rapprochement between Russia and China, but I think it's a one-sided love affair, basically, because...
and who's doing the loving?
Putin is doing the wooing, and China has the upper hand and is taking advantage of Putin's needs to find an ally. So there was a long-term contract for natural gas where they'd been negotiating, and Putin lowered the price, and China graciously accepted it. So, I mean, it's a little more than that, but as I say, it's one-sided, because China knows that the real market for its products is in the United States and in Europe, and wouldn't want to jeopardize those markets by being too close to Russia. And now you have the formation of the what is it?
International Infrastructure Bank. Yeah.
And that's a big step forward for China. I think that the Western countries have made a mistake in not allowing China and the other developing world to have a bigger say in the Bretton Woods institutions, which are basically controlled by either United States. One is by the United States, that's the World Bank, and the IMF by Europe. They have a sort of stranglehold on the nominating the president, and I think it would have been better to bring the developing world in rather than to now create a situation where they are forming rival institutions.
Well, this gets to the dysfunctionality of Washington, because isn't it the case that Obama did have some modest amendment to China's role that Congress just locked up?
Absolutely. Couldn't get it through Congress. And Europe also didn't want to budge on the IMF. And that weakens those organizations.
So, I mean, you seem to have had a real fascination for those moments in myriad countries' histories where they are sort of trying to reinvent themselves, where something stops and something else begins. And Myanmar, we don't quite know the end game there. It's in transition. It has some problematic things. We have now Sri Lanka happening. So what is your sort of, how do you look conceptually at these countries that you move into with tremendous energy and optimism and substantial resources when they hit these moments of...
Well, these are windows of opportunity. While they're open, you want to walk in. And the sooner you do it, and the more effective, the early times are the times when you can make the biggest contribution. So that's basically. I'm now looking at Sri Lanka because I think there is a change there, very important, and. If they're facing elections, and if they are successful, then I think you could really have a change which is really repressive, quite bloody regime, yielding to a democratic or opening. So. Sri Lanka is, I'm just at the beginning to, just had a first sort of exploration.
Hope springs eternal.
Yeah.
So, I mean, when you look at these countries, George, you have to acknowledge that it used to be the case we thought, well, if you just get rid of Saddam Hussein, dictator X, Y, Z, democracy would spring forth like, Athena out of the head of Zeus. But it doesn't work out that way. So I mean, you seem to tread where sometimes angels fear to go.
Yeah. That's my specialty. Not being an angel, by the way. At any rate, it's the lesson you learn is that it takes much, much longer, and it's probably not one lifetime is not really enough to see in many cases. I mean, there are some. When I look at, let's say, today's Poland, it has changed, but let's say Russia, which will change, but it's more ripe for change now, having invested 25 years. Well, we didn't last that long. I think we pulled out around 2000. So, but we continued with projects, and we are still engaged in Russia even today. And I'm confident that Russia will mature and it will change. Putin won't change now because he has committed himself to a new form of his own brand of ethnic and religious and socially conservative nationalism. But he's now the prisoner of the genie that he allowed to come out of the bottle, and he won't be able to put it back. So Putin won't change. And people who think that he will are going to be disappointed, and they are making a mistake in confusing Russia with the Putin regime. In other words, one should engage in Russia, and we remain engaged in Russia even today, but it's not the Putin regime.
Okay, by that analogy then, how do you analyze, and we're here at the Asia Society, so how do you analyze the situation in China in terms of change, the sort of central motion of history? Where do you think it's going, and what do you think the right posture is for foundations like yours, civil society, but also government policy?
Well, we would be happy to be engaged in China, but we are not welcome. And therefore, and in fact, we actually have some projects in China, but we are extremely careful in disclosing what we are doing and making the authorities aware, and very often they disallow it because they have a very efficient political police, and I consider myself as typhoid Mary. In other words, the people whom we help, we don't help because they immediately are put into a different category and are much more closely examined. So it's better for us not to be active because we could be hurting the people whom we would want to help.
And what's your prognosis? You suggested that you're somewhat optimistic about Russia, Putin aside. How do you view?
Well, it's longer. I mean, that's a longer term project.
But China?
Well, China, I think, is at a crossroads because it has been extremely successful, but it has to change its growth model. And if it's successful in making the transition, it could open up, become more open. It's because the reforms are they are market-oriented reform, economic reform, but political reform is not allowed, and that's an imbalance. For China to become a more open society, it needs political reform. But now it's in a difficult transition, and actually power is being centralized in the hands of the president, and I think it will not, if it's successful, and and I think there's a reasonable chance that it will be successful. Then hopefully there'll be more room for political reform, and then you could have a new world order where China would be a very important member of a major power, and that would be the positive outcome. And if it's the economic transformation fails, then the fallback is to hold power, hold the country together by having some external conflict. Conflict with, obviously, China and Japan are set up for that. And then you have a very dismal prospect for the world.